So we're 3 seconds into it, and Taylor, you are my first episode for JC Syndicated. Do you have any thoughts about that? What do you think?
I feel really special. I feel like this is a kind of a momentous occasion.
All right, well, so I'm going to go in post. I'll be adding your bio, but why don't we just start with a little bit where you could just tell us who you are and what you're doing today and your background.
Yeah, I'll give you a little background about myself. Maybe I'll start with where I am now and backtrack a little bit. Currently, I am a novelist. I write thriller novels. My fourth book in a series, the Garrett Kohl series, came out, and it's sort of a neo-Western meets Operative style thriller. So that just came out in September. And I'm about to finish my fifth book, which is unrelated to the series. It's going to be a standalone or potential new series, but it all still in the vein of operations, military operations, intelligence world, all that kind of stuff. That's my background. So again, I'll extrapolate a little, kind of go back a little bit in time, and that's my background. I'm a former CIA intelligence officer, worked in both analysis and operations, and ended up going into the world of defense contracting, doing intelligence work there. So that's who I am. But I'm from Texas. I'm born and raised, grew up on a farm and ranch here, and so that was also my background. So this book series that I have now is sort of a little bit of everything. It's a weird combo of me that's from my horses and cattle upbringing all the way up to the CIA stuff and dealing with global affairs. And so I do novel writing, and then I'm also a screenwriter, and I do some a level of producing on the film TV side. So so it's a little bit of everything, and you know my background. We've known each other for a while. That was by accident purely, because you find yourself not finding the right people to do things. So you just, it's kind of like your Army Ranger background. You just, if somebody's not doing the job, you just jump in and do it yourself. And so I found myself just having to sort of wrangle the cats, if you will, and I found myself in that role. So, but I prefer the writing side. That's what I like to do.
Yeah, so I know you have an amazing story, and like you said, we've known each other for a few years now. We had a lot more in common than we thought originally, but I guess for the audience and also for me, I think it would be interesting to hear, a quick story of like your youth, and then how and what eventually led you into joining the CIA. I mean, that's like super intriguing for everybody, right?
Yeah, everybody. In fact, it's a really strange thing. If you ever look at my resume, it makes no sense. It's almost like a CIA movie in and of itself, because I was a cattle rancher, and then 2 years later I was in the CIA. And so people look at my actual resume and say, there's something weird about this. There's no way that, like, what were you really doing, and why were you, right before you were a cattle rancher, you were all over in South America, you were in Antarctica on a Russian research ship. Well, none of this makes sense, but I say actually it does make sense. But I always like to tell people, people always ask, what was your favorite subject when you were in school? So all the way back from when I was a kid, social studies was my favorite my favorite subject in school. And literally nobody, I don't think anyone ever says social studies, but that was the thing that I loved. I loved people, culture, places. I loved all those things. To me, that was just fascinating. And so, although I grew up in Central Texas on this farm and ranch, and I was, out in the middle of nowhere by myself, I would always look up at jets going overhead, and I might be on horseback or on a tractor or on a four-wheeler or something. I'd go, man, I wonder where they're going. I just was so curious about what was out there in the world. And so I always sort of had that drive, that passion, and just given my age, you think about some of the superheroes that we had, or the James Bonds and the Indiana Jones and all that kind of stuff. And so that's what I was really into. So people ask me, like, what's the stories that got you motivated to write these modern day, to write these thrillers? And that's what I was really, what I started on with were James Bond, Indiana Jones, and then of course on into the Jack Ryan, the Tom Clancy stuff. That really, that sort of got me interested in the world of espionage and what's happening across the globe and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I started with this sort of small town rural life, and but legitimately. So I go back to my resume. I was I was literally working with my dad farming, ranching, and then ended up going to graduate school and I got a master's at Pepperdine. I studied economics and international relations, and ended up doing a graduate level internship at the U.S. mission to the European Union. So for people who don't know what a mission is, it's essentially an embassy. So there's a mission to NATO, there's a mission to the EU. So I was at this mission, which is essentially an embassy. So by the time the CIA recruiter came around to grad school, here I was, this kid with I had the education, economics, international relations. I had the world of the embassy. I'd done international trade work there, and then I was, of course, the guy that took a Russian icebreaker to Antarctica and went through the jungles of Bolivia and climbed over the Andes and Chile and went through the Atacama Desert. So I had this resume of a person who, maybe intellectually, academically, I was there, but also I had that adventurous spirit and willingness to put myself in danger because I wanted to. And you put those things together, and then essentially you have to be able to do what I'm doing right now. You have to be able to communicate well. You have to be able to write, whether you're on the analysis side or the operations side. Essentially, you're right. You're taking a lot of information and you're putting it down on paper, electronic paper, that is, in a cable or a report, and you're sending it out to the community. And so essentially I had the right background to put me in that position.
So what did that look like? I mean, you graduated Pepperdine and then you went on all these adventures and stuff. In terms of your youth and some of your friends, did you just kind of disappear for a little while? They didn't hear from you? I mean, I know that this is kind of back before cell phones and obviously video streaming and everything was so prevalent. What did that kind of look like to friends and family?
It was, I think, terrifying for family because I would disappear. When I was in South America, and I didn't even tell my parents I was going to Antarctica. I called my mom from the boat, and I think it was something crazy like $25 a minute to talk from Antarctica. And so I basically just called my mom, and I was like, "Hey, I'm in Antarctica. I'll explain when I get back, but I'm having fun. It's a great time. I'm learning lots, and talk to you, love you, bye." And so I was a kid that I have 2 kids now. I hope my kids never do what I did, and I think every parent probably says the same thing. So yeah, this is the era of internet cafes. No, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have anything, but they had internet cafes, and they were so unreliable back then. This is early 2000s, and this is 99 and 2000, and so I remember my mom said she got this email from me that just sort of quit halfway through. And I'm sure the electricity went out, but she told me, she said, I could just imagine someone like knocking you over the head and you're like, hitting send so no, communication was terrible. It was expensive when you did call, and just not reliable down in South America. So great times, great adventures. I hope my kids never do this though, but it was the best time of my life. So
that's interesting. What about I don't want to get into too much like tradecraft or anything like that, but once you went down this path towards working in the intelligence community, I guess I would assume would be almost even less communication, maybe because maybe people weren't supposed to exactly know what you were doing or what you were working on. Can you speak about that at all?
Yeah, that was a bit strange to my parents. Again, I was single at the time, so there weren't a whole lot of people to tell. And then all your friends, when you're at the CIA, are in the CIA usually. Mm-hmm. And so that simplified things. I'd tell my parents, hey, I'm going to be gone for a week or so. You're not going to hear from me, but I'll be back. And so they were pretty good. Like, okay, well, just let us know when you're back. Be safe and all that kind of stuff. And so it's a weird world. But again, I was single at the time, so really there was no one to miss me. So that was the good part of doing what I did at the time that I did. I can't imagine it now with, again, having young kids. It would just be tough. That would be a tough lifestyle, and it is a tough lifestyle. And of course, having been in special operations, that military lifestyle is hard on families. It can tear a lot of people apart. And and the CIA is no different in some ways, depending on what you're doing and what your job is. Now, there's some things that are a little bit more grounded and a bit more stable, but to really kind of rise in the ranks there, you gotta you got to run to the guns and run to the next war. And so no, it was a tough lifestyle, but I was glad I was doing what I was doing when I was single, not now. That would be hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so what about in terms of, were you able to get over to the Middle East during GWAT, or again, I don't want you to, breach your confidentiality with the agency or anything, but can you speak on any of that as much as you can?
I never really talk about where I went officially for a variety of reasons, because we travel in weird ways. So, sometimes I travel with people, so I never want to put anyone in jeopardy, or where we would meet people. Honestly, I'll be honest. I did work the Middle East when I was during that time period. But I mostly, if I'm being honest, I mostly went to garden spots. I can't really, complain about the where I ended up, because, how do I explain this? A lot of times when you're meeting people, you don't meet them where they live for obvious reasons, because you're trying to keep that all a secret. So you meet in places where it would make sense for them to meet, maybe like a business hub, if you know what I mean, some place where they should be to be conducting business, because everybody goes there to conduct business, if that makes sense. So, so no, I did get a good glimpse of that part of the world, but for the most part, it wasn't too adventurous in terms of putting myself in these hot spots. And you'll appreciate, again, from being in the special operations community. I was talking to a buddy of mine a while back, and he was a former SEAL, and he was kind of like, nudging me. He's like, hey, yeah, I remember when we were eating MREs and all that kind of stuff. I was like, no, man. I was like, I ate scones and drank lattes in hotel rooms and things like that. I didn't do that. Yeah. I worked on that part of the world. But if you think about the agency, everybody thinks, and again, because of GWAT, Global War on Terror, for those that don't know the acronym, everybody thinks you're in these, running around in caves and up in the mountains and doing all these things. And a lot of people did that. And Joel, I don't want to get into your stuff, but if you think about what the agency's doing, there are people that are doing that, but there are people that want high level access, and usually those high level access people aren't the one in the caves. They're the ones they're the millionaires. They're the ones that have the influence and all that. So we're also looking at that kind of stuff too.
So something that I think is interesting, and I've had these conversations with people, is these days, everything's so polarized. But I notice a lot of people maybe feel one way or another about agencies and federal agencies and all that kind of stuff. But something I've spoken to with different individuals out there is just that no matter where the agencies, what it is they do, people, in corporations and government and everything, there's always good and bad. And so I think people kind of paint it with a broad brush of like, oh, this agency is all completely bad. And so I think people need to know that there's obviously just as many good people, hopefully, as people with malicious intent or nefarious types that we might see in movies and stuff, and so I think today there might be kind of a misconception of that, of like everybody's bad. Do you have an opinion about that? Or I don't want to dive too much into politics or anything, but how do you feel about that?
I think that's a great question, and I think we see people look at the news and they see here are these organizations that are being abused, maybe politically for whatever reason. And whether that's happening or not happening, I can't say myself, because people have asked me this a lot before, and I was like, I was so low level. It was again, back like when you were in the Army. I'm sure you weren't. You were out there, boots on the ground, and then there's somebody up there really high making these decisions. I was the sort of boots on the ground guy, so I never really saw if there were these machinations, things going on. I didn't really see that personally, but that's not to say that it didn't happen or wasn't going on. Yeah, and I think exactly kind of the way you frame your question is exactly how it is. There are people, most of the ground people out there just doing their job, whether it's a soldier, law enforcement, special agent, cop, people, intelligence officers. everybody just wants to do a good job. Everybody's out there. If you wanted to make money, you'd be doing something else. So usually people are in those kind of jobs. Some of it obviously is for the excitement, the adventure. That's a big part. But a lot of people are patriots, and they want to do the right thing, and they want to support their country and keep the country safe. And so I think the vast majority of people are good, and there are good people with good intentions, and people that come from all walks of life and political backgrounds or whatever. And for the most part, I saw, people came together fine. But I think you see a lot more, and I don't know if it's reported more or if it's just kind of things have gotten worse to where it seems like there's some political footballs to be sort of tossed around at times, and people on the ground level get thrown in with that, and that's usually, again, it's usually not they don't have anything to do with that. They're usually just out there trying to do their job to the best of their ability.
Yeah, so you and I, we met, like I said, several years back, and it was through a Bible study, through some common friends that we have, and so I can remember when your name was first brought up, and it was like, hey, we're thinking about adding this individual, and I remember thinking, it's like, oh, he's from the agency, wants to get in the Bible study. And I was like, oh, here we go, man. Infiltration, 100%.
Yeah.
But I can attest that you're a great guy. You're a fellow Christian. Really been excited about everything you've been doing in the book world. We discovered after becoming friends that we actually had common background through another individual that we both knew. I knew him growing up in high school, and you knew him kind of from the college days. But I think touch maybe more on the book and like how that switched over, and like what led you first to even kind of go down that route. And I mean, you have 4 books out now today under the Garrett Kohl. I know you're working on another book. But what did that look like post agency, and then all of a sudden it's like, you're a published author, and I know because I've gone down that route a little bit. It's not an easy thing to do. So first it was agency, now it's like published author. Take us down that path.
Yeah, it's a strange path, and it's a fun one. It's been a difficult one. The hardest thing for me that it took so long to do. I always liked writing. I wrote my first book in the year 2000, and it was a young adult novel, kind of a coming-age story about these kids in the Civil War, and it had nothing to do with, this was before I was in the agency, so I wouldn't have even been able to write about that. But I wrote that book, put it aside, never did anything with it. And it was kind of like a bucket list thing where I was like, check that. Some people are marathon runners, and some people say, I want to run a marathon. And then they do it, and they go, done that. And so for me, it was kind of a bucket list thing. I did write some when I was at the agency, and I did some screenwriting too with one of my best friends there. And so we just enjoyed the process. We enjoyed just writing, telling stories. And so I always wanted to get back to the writing, but I was so busy with work. You're just exhausted by the time you're done, and you write so much in the business that you're just exhausted with it. And so it wasn't until I ended up getting out of the intelligence world altogether, and that's a story in and of itself, where I ended up, I was about a decade in the intel world, and then I got out, I ended up moving up to the Texas Panhandle and becoming an oil and gas landman. Which is kind of funny because we were talking earlier about the show Landman. Now Taylor Sheridan has that, and I used to actually do that for a living. And it's funny, I haven't seen the show yet, but just looking at the trailer, I was like, it's an interesting job because you're getting beat up from all sides, and but it was fun and rewarding too. But it wasn't until I was doing that job until I wanted to write again. And I'd kind of say I was going to do it. And the first couple of wells I drilled were out on a place named, a guy's ranch named John R. Erickson. And you're recognizing the name Erickson because we have the mutual friend and Mark. And but John is the one, he's a famous author, and he writes a kid's series called Hank the Cow Dog. And it's great books, great kids books for anyone's out there that's looking for stuff. And so he's been writing for years. And so I was excited to meet this guy. And I kind of told him, I said, yeah, I'm a writer too. And he said, well, what are you writing? I said, nothing. And he said, well, doesn't sound like you're much of a writer then. You better get after it. I was like, I guess I'm not, And so I always credit John with giving me that sort of a nice kick in the butt of, if you're going to say you're a writer, you better be writing. And so I did. And so I got my laptop, and everywhere I'd go as a landman, because I'd drive hours and hours a day, and I'd go have these meetings, and I'd be waiting for stuff, or I'd be having lunch somewhere. I'd pull out my book, and I'd pull out my laptop, and I'd just start writing. I mean, I remember being up there on a big seismic project. I'm up on the high plains of Texas, so we get blizzards and everything else, and I was on a big seismic project, and I remember I'd parked under this big, it was like a grain storage thing to get out of the snow, and the snow's coming in, and it was so cold. I'd wrapped these like coats around me and everything, and I was just writing and writing and writing, waiting for my next meeting or waiting for something to happen. I was writing. I couldn't bring myself to write the Intel World or Intelligence. I was writing another young adult story, and it wasn't until I ended up I rode the wave up on the energy business, and I rode the bus down, and I ended up losing my job. Got laid off when the market crashed. And that's when I really got serious about it. And my wife had said, you've been writing a lot. Would you like to give this a go? And so I was like, yeah, why don't I do this? And my initial plan was just to self-publish. I thought being a published author with a big, really getting paid and doing all this was a pipe dream. That it doesn't really happen, or it may happen for some people, but it wouldn't happen for me. Fortunately, I got introduced to believe it or not, two New York Times best-selling romance writers here in Amarillo, Texas, and I got invited into their group, and they really took me under their wing, and they said, look, let's give traditional publishing a shot. If it doesn't work, you can self-publish. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But let's just try it. Let's just see what happens. And lo and behold, this is when I started writing more of the CIA stuff again. And they really helped me and coached me, and ended up getting a literary agent, really good one, the one that I wanted up in New York, and then ultimately got on with William Morrow HarperCollins as a publisher. And I had a great editor who has retired since, but he's the one that started Jack Reacher, and so I just had this great opportunity to go this traditional route, and I guess, as they say, the rest is history. So I never thought I'd be traditionally published or have books in airports and Barnes & Noble. And in fact, one of my friends from the D.C. area just sent me my third book, Ricochet, was at CVS, in the little line. And so it was kind of, he was laughing. He said this guy walked by, and he goes, hey, I know that guy, to my book. And the guy just looked at him and walked off. And he's like, I had to tell somebody, And so, but even for me, it's wild to go grocery shopping at Walmart to look over and see my book sitting there. And it's fun, but life goes on, and you just, it's always on to the next thing. And you know me well enough to know it's a busy life. I'm always on deadline. I'm always under the gun, and so it's a fun life, but it's a hard life. And I tell people all the time, this is the hardest job by far that I've ever had. And I didn't expect that. I expected all this time to myself and freedom and everything. And now when you get on that book a year cycle, and of course, as you well know, I do the TV film stuff too, and I've always got some kind of irons in the fire with that. I stay as busy as can be, so I'm always on the go.
Yeah, well, I definitely know you're a go-getter, and you have like an awesome story. I love how it all came together. I like I said, I can attest. It's not easy. I've gone the self-publishing route myself, and so all the accolades to you for everything that you've achieved, because you definitely you chase after things that most people don't even approach. So what about what would you say? Out of like from youth until you came back to the States, what stands out as maybe like one of the most maybe dangerous or threatening times or periods for you? It doesn't necessarily have to be tied to agency or anything else. It could have been a fight. It could have been your trips in South America. Like, was there ever a time where you felt like you almost died, or you were about to die, or anything like that?
Yeah, I think, when I think the South America trip, there was nothing really specifically. I was so young and stupid at the time. I don't think I knew how dangerous what I was doing actually was. Traveling by myself like that. Now I would always find friends to travel with for the most part, but every now and then, they would go their way and I'd go mine, and that's where it got hairy. There was a couple of occasions. There was one when I was in Bolivia. I ended up in this weird situation where I was in a taxi cab, and this guy kept taking me somewhere that I thought I was being kidnapped, and eventually I pulled out. I had a little tiny knife, and so I kind of pulled it back, and I was like, if things go down, I'm just gonna start going, and. Because I'd heard stories like that where, they get, the guy in the car, and then two people will come in on either side and they beat you up.
Yeah, the DEA guy in Colombia. There's a DEA guy in Colombia that got killed just like that.
Yeah. Those things happen, and it wasn't like, oh, a friend of a friend. Like, I would talk to people and be like, I had a bad experience, and they'd tell you about it, and so it's just kind of what you learn to prepare for it. So you kind of think this might happen at some point. So I kind of had my little knife, and I thought, man, it's go time. Let's see what happens. So I started questioning. There's two guys up front, and I was asking them questions, and they were really kind of ignoring me. And and I finally kind of got mad. I was like, where? I was like, ¿Dónde estamos? Where are we going? Where are we going? And finally the guy was like, La puerta, we're at the port, like where we're supposed to go. But so it turned out okay. It wasn't anything weird, but they were acting fishy. I think they were just ignoring me because I don't know why. I think they just didn't care, but and I was being very polite. I was like, where are we? Like, this seems like an unusual route or whatever. And they're just like, gringo or whatever, So just kind of driving on, and then when I got a little testy about it, they finally explained what was going on. So it was fine. So nothing really happened there. Another story that's kind of funny. It's funny now. It wasn't funny at the time, but when I was going through, again, this was Bolivia. I guess Bolivia is always the common denominator here. When I was coming back down through, I wanted a direct shot back to Argentina. I was taking the bus, and I kept asking the guy I kind of got ripped off. They had these really actually beautiful buses you could take that were like these double-decker sleeper buses, and so I thought I was buying this, and I said, this is a direct route, right? And the guy's like, yeah, direct, and it wasn't. I ended up, a day or two later, I'm in the jungles in this crappy bus. It was like, I don't know if you remember the movie Romancing the Stone. It was like...
Yeah, I was just going to say, it sounds like the male version of Romancing the Stone.
It was Romancing the Stone. I was literally outside in the jungle, breaking off limbs and putting them under the bus and pushing the bus through the mud. And there were chickens up and down the thing. And I thought, am I ever going to get through this? And so I did, but it was me, and it was all the native, the Indian people of Bolivia. I was just riding this, and I'm sure they thought, what is this guy doing here, And so when we got to the border of Argentina, I didn't realize what was going on. Well, we got held up at the border forever. And what you realize, at the time, I didn't know, but later, having worked this area as part of the intelligence world, Bolivia is a heavy cocaine, coca producer, heavy cocaine trafficking. So they were stopping us to make sure nobody had drugs and all that. And I got on the bus again, and actually made it through. And the Argentine military pulled us over multiple times during the middle of the night, and they would take you out, dumping people's bag out, and to make you take your shoes off. And so it was a little scary, because you're just this one guy, and they would take you to this weird shack, and these guys with machine guns, they're going like, what are you doing here, why are you in our country, that kind of stuff. And they were actually pretty friendly when it was all said and done. But I don't know, 3:00 in the morning, you're taken in a shack with these young guys with machine guns. You're like, anything could happen, and nobody will know about it. So nothing happened.
Did they ask you silver or lead?
Yeah, plomo plata. Yeah, no, but they did. I did see them. They had this woman. They had dumped her bag out. She had this flower, this is this Indian woman, and she had this flower. I guess she was taking with her, and they were like, "Don't, ¿qué es esto? It's cocaína. It's cocaine, And I don't know if it was cocaine or not. I as soon as I could get off that bus, I got off. And so they dumped me, and that was kind of funny too, because they dumped me off at a bus station at 4 a.m. in South America. I'm like, at what point am I going to get killed here? And I just sat around and waited in the dark until, until another bus came along, and I finally got back to civilization. But yeah, it was a little scary. But I made it. But you learned a few things, and it's how to carry yourself. And I'm not saying that this is foolproof, but people would tell me along the way, other travelers would give you advice and they'd say, look, they're looking for victims. So don't make yourself a victim. So I remember, whether I was hot or cold, I had this big black Patagonia pullover I'd wear, and it kind of puffed me up and made me really big. And I'd put my wraparound shades on, and this is when my hair was real short, and I'd just make it all crazy looking. And so I would get off the bus, and I was big. This is when I worked out, and I'd get off the bus, and I had my bags, and I would look like I am ready to fight. I'd get off the bus and just be like, I am ready to tear someone's head off. And I would never look like I didn't know where I was going. I would pick a point. And so I would pick, I'd say I'm going to go from here to that place. So it didn't look like I was, like this. I would just get off pissed off, and I'd go, boom, I'd make it to this point. And then I'd go, I don't know where I am, but nobody could see that. Nobody, because they said they're watching you when you get off the bus. They're looking for somebody they can get. So I'm not saying that was a perfect thing to do, but I think it was better than being a victim. or looking like one. I look like a nut job. So
yeah, no, you're keying in on all the right things, and I've done the same thing. It's amazing what a pair of black or mirror face sunglasses can do for you.
Yeah.
It gives you a few seconds to basically get to your next cover and conceal position. What about for anybody who might be motivated, or for fans that are reading your books, and or the aspiring author, the person that is basically you, kind of like where they consider themselves a writer, but they haven't taken that first step? Like, any words of encouragement, or any advice that you could offer to them in their journey?
So here's what I tell people. I get this question a lot, and it's a good one, because a lot of people want to do this. And what I always tell people, well, there's two pieces. I'll give you my two pieces that I get. I always say the road to getting traditionally published, begins with 1 million words. And people go, words, that's weird. People always say, how many pages is your book? I'm like, I don't know. We go by word count in the publishing industry, because they'll say we want 90,000 words, or we want 110 or whatever. So most books that people read that are like a thriller is probably close to 100,000 words, or maybe less, maybe more, depending. But I always say the road to getting published begins with 1 million words, and that's like almost 10 books, if you want to think about it. But that was kind of that's how many books or versions of books that I wrote that was probably added up to 1 million words. And the reason I say that is because you're not gonna, if you think I'm gonna write this one book and it's gonna be published and it's gonna get, with a big publishing company, that's probably never gonna happen. I mean, I'm not saying never, never say never, but the reality is, and we're mutual friends with Don Bentley. Don wrote multiple books, and I wrote multiple books, and most of my friends wrote multiple books that we'll never do anything with. They'll just sit there. They'll sit there on your computer, and that's fine, because you're learning who you are. You're finding your voice. You're getting practice. So I'd say, tell people, give yourself some time to find that right voice, to study other writers, study how they do it. It doesn't mean you have to do it exactly like that, but see who's successful and figure out why they're successful. When I first started writing Garrett Kohl, I would go, and I'm doing this right now because I'm writing an entirely new book. I'd go to the library and I'd get stacks and I'd put them by my bedside and I'd read all the greats, and I go, why does this book work? Why does this book not work? And for me, if you want to ask people that are getting, if somebody wanted to get in the series, what I'd tell you is I came away, my big takeaway is I'd read 150 pages in a book, and I'd take it back to the library. And I had to ask myself this question. I was like, you read 150 pages of a book and you could take it back to the library? That's not right. You shouldn't be able to do that. By 150 pages, you should be so invested in those characters that you have to see it through. And so what I really set out to do is write character-driven thriller novels. And so that, I would give the advice again: study people, write a lot, practice a lot, study the people who've done it right, find out what they do right, and then find out, like, why didn't this 100%, like, I was entertained, but why didn't I see it through? So that's a piece, is to study the greats. And then I know you asked for one, I'm giving you three. And then the final advice I give people, and I guess this is unusual, but one thing that I noticed is that when I would finish a book, even before it's published, I had some other authors go, listen, you don't know how important it is that you wrote and finished a book. They said, even if you never do anything with it, you finished one. Because a lot of authors, I'd say most people who call themselves authors, maybe not professionally, but they've never finished a book. They've started a bunch of books that they never finished. And I'm telling you, that's where the rubber meets the road. I'm in that right now with book 5, because the way I write all these horrible, like, things that happen along the way, and then I got to make them come back in a meaningful way, to where, and I just had this conversation with my agent yesterday, is, I'm trying to, bring everything back, and I like to blow minds. I like people to get to the end and go, I didn't see that coming, or wow, that was amazing. Because we've all read books or seen a movie, like, it's really, really, really good, and then you get to the end, you're like, oh, so that's it? Like, after all this, you leave me with this, and I respect my readers' time. I know taking books takes time. I know if you're going out and buying the book, they're investing in this. So I want to give my readers everything I can possibly give them. I want them to come away fulfilled, and I want them to come away hungry for more. So I would tell people, even if you're in this practice phase, start and finish a book. That book might be terrible, and that's okay. It's okay. Brad Thor would always say, give yourself permission to write a bad book. So give yourself permission to write a bad book, but learn from that, and then go write another one.